Humans have, over the course of thousands of years, waged many wars, but none will compare to the scope and tragedy that belong solely to World War II. This war engulfed hundreds of nations and, in its insatiable lust, consumed the lives of millions of men, women, and children. The cost in money exceeded the billions. What, you ask, could possibly be so important as to warrant such expenditure and carnage? It was the greed of mainly three nations, nations that wanted more land, more power, and more resources. Their mindless selfishness cost more lives and money than had ever been witnessed on Earth. Entire generations of men were wiped out. That is the legacy of World War II. Germany, Italy, and Japan were those countries. They were the Axis powers, and they all agreed on one thing. Their country's gain was more important than others' loss. Germany was the bulldog of the group. It led Italy and Japan in their conquest. The entire world was a battleground, and each country had to choose sides. But let's focus on the European theater, specifically Germany. After the Great War, known as World War I, Germany was forced to meet some demands with the Treaty of Versailles. The Big Four, leaders from the United States, Italy, France, and Britain, took 4 months to agree on terms for the Germans. The terms were unimaginably harsh, and the Germans had no choice but to accept, for resumption of the war was threatened. Germany was forced to give up many territories, as well as pay billions of dollars in reparations. Additionally, restrictions were put on their military size, so they could never build up their armies again. This put Germany into a giant state of depression. Although the Treaty of Versailles contributed somewhat to Germany starting World War II, in order to regain lost territory and exact revenge, there is also another factor. The factor had a name: Adolf Hitler. Hitler would become one of the most notorious dictators of all time. Adolf Hitler was an Austrian who joined the German army during the First World War. After their defeat, he claimed that he would be the one to save Germany once again. He joined the German Workers' Party because of his similar beliefs. His remarkable speaking ability made an increasing number of people notice him, and the party made him chairman. The party was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Political opponents called them the Nazis. Hitler tried to take advantage of the unrest in Germany. He eventually gained 32% of the cabinet, primarily Nazis, and soon he had complete control over the country. He answered to no one and could do as he pleased. World War II started in 1939, and for 5 long years it raged. Alliances shifted and countries fell. It was not long before only Russia and Britain stood free in Europe. Japan brought the U.S. into the war in the Pacific, but Roosevelt knew that he had to fight in Europe as well. Along with Canada and Britain, the U.S. planned an invasion of German-occupied France. Hopefully, it would be the beginning of the end for Germany's reign of terror. It was called Operation Overlord. The plan was to invade France by crossing the English Channel and landing at several beaches along the coast. But it would not be easy. The Germans were expecting an attack. Counterintelligence would have to plan false information, and the sites would have to be chosen very carefully if the operation were to be a success. Additionally, troops and supplies would have to be amassed in Britain, ready to land and take France by storm. It was a complicated and delicate undertaking, one that could fail miserably or spell disaster for Germany.
The introduction to the outline of Operation Overlord states that an operation of the nature and size of Operation Overlord has never been previously attempted in history. The massive operation was a result of meticulous planning. First, a location had to be picked. The Germans expected the Allies to attack a port city, as they could need a place to bring in supplies, and so all of France's ports were soon heavily fortified. But the ingenuity of the Allies was undiminished. Using scrap metal and sunken ships, they would create 2 artificial harbors, therefore allowing them to choose any place along the French coast to land.
Soon, counterintelligence was hard at work, putting every effort into convincing the Germans that the landings would take place at Pas de Calais, the most favorable landing place. The actual site would be around the Caen area. By the time the invasion took place, the Germans were convinced that the landings would happen at Pas de Calais, and the Caen area was as lightly defended as it was ever going to be.
The invasion called for a colossal, cohesive effort by the Navy, Air, and Land forces. 5,000 ships were to be employed in the mission to land around 150,000 men on the beaches Omaha, Utah, Gold, Sword, and Juneau. Meanwhile, 19,000 paratroopers would land behind German lines to disrupt communications and sabotage German counteroffensive efforts. The Air Force would focus on weakening German defenses through intense bombing raids, supported by the massive naval battleships. Inventors were hard at work, designing specialized vehicles such as amphibious tanks that could aid in the landing. All that remained now was for the weather to cooperate. There were 58,000 U.S. troops and 75,000 other troops, mainly British and Canadian, that would land on the beaches. The supplies would follow in the form of 2 million tons of weapons and supplies, 1,500 tanks, and masses of food and fuel. The complexity of the invasion constantly astounds.
First, the air and naval forces would bomb the German defenses. Then the amphibious tanks would roll in, followed by the infantry and paratroopers. If all went according to plan, the Germans would be caught by surprise and would be cut off from reinforcements. But what were we facing? What fortifications did the Germans have at the landing beaches? Omaha Beach, at least, was still heavily fortified, unbeknownst to the Allies at the time. They believed that Omaha was very sparsely fortified, and thus it was chosen as a main landing site. However, the Germans still had a heavy defensive perimeter. 85 machine gun nests, 38 rocket emplacements, 35 pillboxes, 18 anti-tank gun positions, 8 gun batteries, 6 mortar pits, and 4 field artillery positions, all linked by an extensive network of trenches, faced the Allied landing craft. Not only were the fortifications greater than anticipated, the soldiers stationed there were toughened veterans of the Eastern Front. The invasion was supposed to set off early on June 5th, but was postponed for one day due to the weather. So late on June 5th, 1944, the invasion began with the paratroopers.